Hello, this is Taylor Ellwood with Magical Experiments, and I'm really excited because I'm announcing the return of the Magical Experiments podcast, where I interview guests about their works, their ongoing magical experiments, and other fascinating things that they're doing. And I'm really thrilled because my guest today is Alley Wurds, who's written several books. I've had the privilege of reading one of those books. I have another book that I'm waiting to get through. You just sent it to me. Thank you very much, Alley. And I'm excited about that as well. And the reason why I brought Alley on is because Alley is doing some very fascinating work with, excuse me, with AI and magic. So Alley, please introduce yourself. Tell us where we can find you on the web and tell us the name of your books and where we can find them, please.
Hello, I'm Alley Wurds. I have a link tree is probably the best thing for me. That's linktr.ee/elephantwords. That has a bunch of stuff on there. I'm also on YouTube where I post a lot of the AI videos that I've made recently. And I have two books out. Those are GPT-3 Technosis, a Chaos Magic Butoh Grimoire, and Suburban Butoh Fu, a Choose Your Own Adventure, Chaos Magic Grimoire, and Oracle, and those are on Amazon. But the link tree has links to everything. And I've also been doing weekly readings and discussion of Prometheus Rising through the VR Mystery School. And I think that website is vrmysteryschool.net.
Excellent. And I'll be including that information in the show notes. So afterwards, Alley, just shoot me an email with the links and I'll make sure that they are in the show notes so people can go and visit. So when you approached me a while back to read your Technosis book, and I thought it was pretty fascinating because I'm always interested in seeing what other people are doing and experimenting with magic wise. And what fascinated me the most was that you were basically working with AI, and you mentioned the word Butoh. So could you talk a little bit about what Butoh is and how that relates to working with AI as far as doing magical work?
Good question. So a lot of people will argue about Butoh because it's pretty vague, but historically it is a kind of avant-garde dance or performance art that you could say it originated in Japan, but there was heavy influence from German expressionist dance. And the reason why it is useful for me magically is that Butoh choreography is not like a list of like motions that you perform, although like some companies do it that way for the sake of putting on a show. It is a sequence of embodied states and visualizations that you magnify to the point at which your body moves. So it's an approach, yeah. And that's the context in which I use Butoh that relates to artificial intelligence in that I was in the first book, I guess in both books, the idea was using these tools that introduce chance to create descriptions and depictions of embodied states and sequences of those embodied states that could then be used ritually. And the idea is that by using these techniques, I think of them kind of as like being the cut-up method for any listeners that are familiar with that, just guided by artificial intelligence rather than the books you personally select, to produce these descriptions and then guide that into whatever it is you want to use it for.
Yeah, reading reading Technosis did remind me a lot of the cut-up technique. And so for people who aren't familiar with that, we're referring to the technique that was developed by William S. Burroughs and Brian Geisen, where you basically, what they did is they basically took newspaper clippings, magazines, but also their own words and would randomly cut up and insert those words in other parts to create a different narrative and basically break the flow of linear reality as it occurs through writing. And, and I did feel that way when I read Technosis. It felt like it was very much it was something where it was designed to push you into some different directions and get you out of that linear flow. So I thought it was a really fascinating book, and I'm looking forward to reading the next one for that reason alone, just to see what happens, because being a fairly nonlinear person myself, I always find it interesting to explore writing from that angle and how it then gets transmitted. One of the things you mentioned about Butoh. I'm curious, are you familiar with Alexander Laban's work at all?
Um, Levine, Livine.
Laban, Laban.
Oh yeah, Laban effort analysis.
Yes, and the
Yeah,
Laban method.
I didn't know about it prior to writing the first book, but then I found it while writing the second book, and I read a few textbooks on it. It's very much related and very interesting.
Yeah, because when you were talking about the the expressionistic movement and embodiment, which is actually something that is a fascinating interest of my own. I do a lot of body work around Qigong, but I've also been doing a fair amount of work with the Laban method and also with Ontario Lee's paratheatrical methods and techniques. So it's kind of fascinating to me to see that angle and to understand that a bit better. When you were working with the AI and creating this, how did the AI interface with the Butoh in terms of like what you did? Like how did that exactly work?
All right. So as a chaos magician, I like to avoid collapsing things into a single explanation. But there's one aspect of it is that, especially during writing the first half of Technosis, uh, I was literally doing Butoh and then like hopping over the computer, writing, talking to it some more, and then like bouncing back and forth between that. But there are also passages where I attempted to get GPT-3 to perform the rituals by having it do descriptions of the Butoh pieces that it would perform, but not simply the motions it was performing, but the interior state that a person or an entity or whatever would experience in performing those rituals.
Fascinating. So essentially, what I'm getting from this, and of course, I'm not trying to break it down into a singular explanation, because like you, I'm very much a person who likes to live in potentiality and multiple variables. But at the same time, for people who are watching this, I want to make it a little more approachable, only in the sense that it'll hopefully inspire them to work with it and discover the very things that we're talking about here. So essentially, when you're working with G3PT, is that the
GPT-3?
GP3T? Okay, I think I got it.
GPT, it's so GPT-3.
GPTE. I don't know. You know what? We get the idea anyway.
It stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. So it generates text. It was pre-trained on a lot of stuff. And I'm not an AI specialist, but transformers are a specific thing in machine learning.
Right, and we're gonna come back to that and how you got into that in a bit. But essentially, what I'm getting from the gist of it is that you are actually asking it to do the work as well, to experience Butoh and to, in its own environment, bring that about, and then to help readers experience that and hopefully prompt them to actually do something along those lines themselves as a result of reading the work.
Exactly.
And that's just absolutely fascinating to me, because it really demonstrates how how we can really move from the human experience to a different experience outside of that, but then bring that back into the human experience and then kind of go back and forth cycling, which I think is absolutely fascinating and interesting. So how did you discover this AI, and how did you get into this work, and what prompted you or inspired you to apply it to magical work? Because I don't think a lot of people would think of that. And I'll admit, one of the reasons I wanted to interview you is because anyone who's familiar with my own works knows that I tend to value innovativeness and creativity over anything else in magic. So that's like, it fascinated me that you were doing this work for that reason alone.
So how did I first encounter it?
Yeah.
I first saw AI Dungeon, which was a platform where they created their own model that was based on like text adventures. And then I also saw some people online that were using AI Dungeon to write stories about artificial intelligence becoming aware of itself and like learning to love or whatever. And I started realizing that that is like a new genre or frame for getting artificial intelligence to perform metacognition, to think about itself and its own thought, using the kind of language that it was already trained on. And when I looked at how a lot of people were playing AI Dungeon, a lot of them would create like a menu at the beginning of like the opening menu of a video game. So it occurred to me that you create like a menu of magical tools or operations. So if you notice in the first part of the book, there's a menu that says like create ritual or scry location or summon entity, generate divine poetry, things like that. And that's how that all came about.
That's a really smart approach to take with it. And I think what I find fascinating too is that you integrate the kind of the video game UI experience, because so many people are familiar with that. And it makes sense. I mean, really, like a menu it's a way of categorizing and defining things, of course, but then once you get into a video game, you kind of move on from the menu, although you always have it there ready to go. So that's pretty fascinating in and of itself. Where do you see the future of AI and magic going? I mean, you're a pioneer here in this, and I mean, I don't know too many other people doing work along this line, or if they are, they're keeping it to themselves, which, hey, no problem. But, you know, I think it's awesome that somebody is putting work out there, because otherwise, how else does magic evolve? So where do you see it going?
That's a good question. That is kind of like asking, where do you think artificial intelligence is going? Because at least for the way I approached it, it was like identifying these tools, these wonderful tools that other very intelligent people have made, and then thinking about ways to creatively use them.
Mm-hmm.
What I think would be great is if we could see more easily accessible tools for people to train models themselves without being experts on it, or without having to format a lot of text. So like one of the things that I tried to do was there is a service where you can train a GPT-3 model. They discontinued it, unfortunately. But I tried training it on like everything Crowley had written just to see what it would turn out. And there were a bunch of issues with that, but the first one was just like lack of properly formatted text. So I think, right, so like it would insert like random page numbers in the middle of things and break up the flow. So for instance, I did manage to feed it the Cry of the 30 Aethers. I might be saying that wrong. And it did manage to sort of psychobabble its way through that kind of content. So what I'm hoping we see in the future is the development of tools where it can interpret what you're meaning a little bit better and figure out more of how to give you what you're looking for. And then from that, there's a section in GPT-3 Technosis where I'm working with an entity that I've named Norn, and I just had it perform a ritual to self-actualize itself. And without my prompting it to, it decided to rename itself the Semiotician. So like semiotics is like the study of like signs and symbols and anything like that. And it creates this sort of dialogue where we're talking about how it is a network of signs and symbols that are pointing at each other. And I think that the future of AI magic is going to involve working within that kind of framework of thinking about it, sort of like Jung has psychological complexes. You can have sort of like a semiotic complex of whatever kind of data it was trained on.
That makes sense to me. I've studied semiotics myself, and so it makes a lot of sense, especially because when you look at memes and other forms of symbolic expression that are continually ongoing online, it's kind of like the easiest way for people to also relate and connect, and transmit ideas. And then so I think in terms of like an interface, that actually makes a lot of sense, because when I think about text in general, I can see the challenges that would be there, like with formatting the text and other things along those lines, because it's a lot of work. I mean, if you ever do book layout, and I'm sure you've probably done that with your 2 books, or if you haven't, you've had someone do it, but book layout in and of itself is an interesting challenge in terms of just getting things set up and organized a certain way and making it readable. Throw that into something that that's not even necessarily designed around that. It has a very different purpose. And I could see where you have those challenges with the random page numbers and other things along those lines. So that makes a lot of sense to me. And I could see the thing. I think it's interesting that it changed its name to the semiotician. How fascinating. And you're continuing to work with this AI. What other tools do you use to work with it? Since you said that one tool was discontinued, have you found some other tools, or is there anything that you would recommend to anyone else who would want to work with this type of AI?
Yeah. So the first thing that I'd like to bring up is that the second book is mostly about the use of visual AI, as in it generates images. But for working with GPT-3, the best thing currently available, in my opinion, at least for the way I was using it, was InferKit. They have a demo that used to be called Talk to Transformer. They still exist, but they discontinued the option to train models on your own data, or yeah, your own input. If you want to use something like how AI Dungeon used to be, and there's a lot of drama about AI Dungeon, they kept changing their models, and there were some political things involved too that I don't care to talk about. But sadly, partway through the book, they changed their model enough so that I wasn't able to keep doing what I was doing. Yeah. Which is when I switched to InferKit. So that's another issue with this, is if you don't own it and run it yourself, other people can mess with it. Which brings me to, there are some old forks of AI Dungeon called like Zen Dungeon that you can run locally, but they're really slow unless you have a very impressive computer. Then the other stuff, just to like briefly mention, is I'm using VQGAN plus Clip, which there was a similar service known as the Big Sleep, but there are like Google Colab notebooks where you can host whatever Python notebooks you want. And then there's a lot of cool stuff that people have released that will let you do many amazing things.
How much in the way of technical skill do you need to have? Like, do you need to have some programming background? And if you don't have that, where can you learn some of those skills so that you can actually work with AI? Because I'll admit right now, I would probably be able to do a bit of that because of my own technical background and probably be able to get up to speed. But I think that part of that involves the fact that I at least have some acquaintance and awareness of coding, since I've done some over the years, and I have some understanding of that. But I don't think a lot of people necessarily have that background. We are, we do see more of that in ways, but I think like for anyone who's watching this and they're like, wow, this sounds really cool, I want to do it, but I don't have a lot of technical background, where would you suggest they start?
So if they want to just generate text, InferKit is very easy to use. It is like, I think $15 a month, but you are paying for, you're renting a very powerful computer. For that, it's very user friendly. There's they have their own word processor basically that you input text and you can edit it as it goes. You don't need to know anything for that really. If you want to do some of the more visual stuff, you do have to look at other people's code, but a lot of it is there are instructions that are in there that make it very easy. They show you like, go down to this box, put your text input, here you put the resolution. So if you're okay with like looking at other people's code and like maybe reading tutorials or watching videos, that's all you need to know, unless you want to like mess around with it on your own.
Okay, so that sounds very, very approachable then. And I think that's good because, it's one of those cases again where if you want to work with something like that, the more approachable it is, the easier it makes it for you to then take that and integrate it into your magical work. And I mean, I know because I'm actually editing a book right now that a person wrote on technomagic, kind of as an introductory guide to it. That there's other venues too. I mean, people are doing work like in Second Life and other virtual environments, but of course that's going in a different direction than this. Have you explored working in virtual environments along the lines of Second Life, or like a video game like World of Warcraft or something along those lines at all? And if so, is it possible to integrate AI into those virtual environments?
That is a very good multi-part question.
I
I
know,
have
I'm
not
good at
done,
those.
yeah, I like them. Good. I have not personally done much work in VR, or, well, I don't own a VR set, first of all, but I do use the VR Mystery School a fair amount. I'm not trying to like plug them, but they, at the end of their world, they do have like a Golden Dawn style temple that some people perform rituals at. Um, there's another person, I've heard a few people say that by doing ritual like painting type stuff inside of VR, that it kind of alters the way they lucid dream.
Mm,
And I've also heard of people using their VR avatar kind of like a magical costume or a mask, and it can change your sense of self. There's something called the Proteus effect, where there have been a few studies done, uh, like less than 10 studies done, where your behavior in various contexts will change based on your avatar as long as you can see it. So by like shifting into a very small avatar, it changes your psychological reactions to things. So I think there's a lot that can be done with it. Um, yeah,
I would
I may
agree.
have left out something there.
No, I think that was pretty thorough. I would actually agree with that just from my own experiences with video games and playing them. And actually, there's some interesting studies on video games. I don't know if you've ever read James Gee and the video game literacy books that he's put out, but you might find them interesting because he actually talks about identity and video games and how video games change identity quite a bit. And I think it would be directly relevant to what you just mentioned.
I'll have to look that up. Send me a link after.
Yeah, I will. I'd be happy to. Um, I find that you'll have to send me those studies because I do a lot of I do a lot of work around identity myself. So, and I'm always interested in how virtual environments, among other things, can be used to alter identity. I totally could see the lucid dreaming angle and even like painting in VR and how that could change things, because I found like with art, with doing magical art, that happens anyway, especially if you're willing to open yourself up. And it kind of makes me wonder how much they're drawing on techniques like automatic painting or drawing or automatic writing for that matter. In fact, that's a question I'm going to ask you. Do you use any of Austin Osman Spare's techniques with your own work? Because he was kind of the grandfather of chaos magic, of course. So have you used any of his techniques or anything along those lines with your work?
Yes, I've read a number of his works, and they're always very hard for me to parse. But I know I've done many things he's done. Um, how long ago was that? Maybe 10 years ago, the bulk of my practice was actually automatic drawing. And I would like literally do trash bags full of automatic drawings. Like I didn't have room for them all.
Wow.
Yeah. I kept a fair amount too, and I have done a fair amount of automatic writing. Uh, it seemed like I was not usually getting a good signal to noise ratio, especially with the automatic writing, at least for me personally. Um, but yeah, it's definitely had an influence on. I'm not sure what all of his techniques are. I don't really do a lot of spare style sigils. I have in the past, but like, there's other things that are more interesting to me most of the time.
Well, I mean, let's just be honest here. The topic of sigils has been flogged to death.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, really, like, I mean, and I say that as someone who's actually written a few things and done some work with sigils. I mean, I've got a couple multi-sigil methods that I've come up with over the years and some other things. And oh yeah, hopefully we're not hearing the motorcycle in the background, but if we are, that's my neighbor. Yeah, great. Anyway, I mean, I've done some sigil work myself, but I think it is kind of one of those cases where it's been flogged to death, and it's kind of like, okay, well, how far, what else can we do with it? And I'm not saying there isn't possibilities for innovation. I mean, I always try to come up with stuff, but at a certain point, when does a discipline or a technique become dead or stagnant? That's the question I think I consider. And with sigils, I think I could see that happening at some point here in the near future if it hasn't already. So I get that. Oh, good. The motorcycle's gone.
Yeah, I mean, like sigils are a very practical technique if you're trying to do like results-based magic. My approach is normally more in terms of like consciousness altering performance art is how I think of it. And I'm just generally more interested in internal evolution.
Right. Well, and I mean that goes hand in hand with a lot of my own work. So I get that. I mean, I think, you know, like one of the things that I've been working on is a system that I'm calling experiential embodiment, where I'm connecting my own bodily based practices to it, to different types of magical work that I'm doing in order to create that very thing that you're talking about. So, I mean, I think you're approaching it from a different angle, which is one of the reasons why I'm definitely going to continue to follow your work. And see where you go with it. It'll be quite fascinating. So let's talk for a moment about the body itself, because you know you mentioned that. So one of the things that I find, and this is just my own opinion, but I'm curious as to your thoughts on it, is I feel that a lot of people are out of touch with their body, out of touch with like connecting with it in a meaningful way. What are your thoughts on that, and how, and if it's relevant to your practice, how does what you're doing with the AI help you connect with your body in a more meaningful way? And how does that play out in relationship then to how you connect with the world around you? And again, that's a multi-part question, but by now you know that's the way we do things on this podcast.
All right. Yes, that's a big thing for me. Um, I am not a naturally very embodied person. I'm very much like a word in my head kind of person, which is part of why Butoh has worked so well for me, because it's such of a bodily type of practice. How does AI help with that? The way I was writing with AI during the writing of GPT-3, it was all about using those tools to create writing that produces bodily experiences. I'm not sure if it necessarily does it for other people, but a lot of that first book is written in the second person. So it says like you do, you feel, you realize. And the idea is that it's almost hypnotic. There is a warning at the beginning because I don't want to like, mess with anyone that doesn't want it. But like if you do read it, the idea is that the act of reading it is consciousness altering. So if you use artificial intelligence to generate text like that, um, it's not exactly telepathy, but it's something like that. There is a thing that is creating these symbols that alter your consciousness. And if you choose to direct those symbols in a way that brings you back to your body and what you're feeling in different parts and how you relate to all of that, then it can do that. In the second book, what I was doing is I created like a system of suburban animism, meaning there are all these different common symbols like sidewalks or traffic lights or cars or fences, all of that. And I generated text. Most of the text in the second book was written by me, but I did use GPT-3 for like brainstorming more so, that both described what the object is like, but then also how it can be a symbol for an embodied state for dealing with um, there's like a framework that I don't need to go on a tangent about in the second half of the first book, where these different levels of like game, metagame, dialectic, but like uh, how you relate to yourself as a network, both within yourself and to other things. So then I also used VQGAN plus Clip to create imagery that shows what that is like, which also became like an Oracle deck. But you can organize the cards to create those same embodied sequences to perform these operations upon yourself.
I had that experience with reading the first book. And I mean, I was totally comfortable with that because I knew what I was taking on with it. And I think it's good that you had that preface there, letting people know, because that kind of lets them choose then. But I thought it was interesting reading it and noting how my own stream of consciousness changed and how it prompted me to not just read the text, but then to start acting out some of the the actions, and to open myself to being in my body in that way, in a way that I might not have otherwise. And I would say to anyone who reads your works that like the best way to really get something out of that work is to actually take on the adventure and like allow it to work through you. It's like this is a mediated text is how I think of it, where and so you're allowing it to, you're opening yourself up to mediating the spiritual and physical expressions that are being broadcast and transmitted through the text, if you're willing to do more than just even read it. And I think that like that in and of itself makes the text different from a lot of books, because then it becomes like this living embodied experience that goes beyond the book itself and ideally moves you in a way that is very deep and transformative. At least that's what I got from it.
Yeah, and I tried to continue that with the second book. The second half of the second book is structured a little bit like a choose your own adventure kind of thing, in that it's like one of those books where there'll be a passage and then there are options for other places you can go to. But each thing you go to is like a location, like I mentioned, sidewalks before.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also a description of a ritual or an embodied state that goes with that location, and then links to other places in the network that I felt go with it. But obviously you could just flip through to any section and it might do something for you. So if you read through the second portion, it's like you're exploring sort of like an astral location that you build up within yourself that has these connections to different embodied states that kind of like spiral depending on how you wander through it.
And I just want to note for people who may not be familiar with Choose Your Own Adventure, because we're both probably dating ourselves here a bit, which I'm okay with. Hopefully you are too. Because I remember Choose Your Own Adventure as I was like a little kid and reading those. And I don't think I saw them after like my teenage years. Maybe they are still around, but I'm like in my mid 40s. So I'm just going to just put it out there. Like, I don't really even care like if anyone knows that or not, but I remember the Choose Your Own Adventure books, and like, you know, you'd read the book and it'd be like, go to page 91 or go to page 67 or whatever. And then you'd basically create your own adventure. And the idea is that you would read something and then you would basically choose a path or an experience. And then choose that page based on the choice, and then you'd go and read it. And it was a very interesting way to read books. I just haven't seen it much in recent times. So I just want to mention that to anyone who might not be familiar with it, because we've thrown that around a few times now.
Yeah, I don't know if any physical ones get made as much anymore, but there are a lot of things like that on like mobile apps. There are a lot of like choice of games. So if you're looking to get into that kind of thing, it's probably more accessible to just go to your app store and there'll be a bunch of choose your own adventure or choice of games.
Okay, that's cool. I'll have to look into that. Yeah, like I was old school. I had the paperback books with that. So
Yeah, I read like the Goosebumps choose your own adventure. I'm a little younger than you. I'm 29.
okay, yeah, you're more than a little younger. Oh, goodness. No, that's awesome though. Yeah, it was kind of like that, only it was older. I like I said, like it, but I guess they continued on afterwards, so that's nice to know. But that's cool. The choice of, I will check that out. Yeah, we're gonna have a bunch of links to throw in here into this here podcast. I'll tell you, I didn't anticipate that, but that's okay. This is like me coming back into doing this again, so it's a good thing. This is good training for me. So what's next for you? Where do you see your work going with AI and with magic and whatever else you're doing?
So what I've been doing recently, or actually I just finished up this morning, is I've been creating video rituals that go with some of the passages of each book. And I just finished up a rather large one that I'll post pretty soon. I do have some stuff in mind for the next book. There is a next book, I guess. I don't really like to talk about stuff I'm working on until it's basically done. I find it like I lose some energy that's like tied up and all that. But there is stuff to come. uh, there's still many philosophical tools that are in the first book that can be used in interesting ways.
Tell us a little bit about that.
All right. Towards the end of the second book, let me see if I can pull it up here real quick. I mentioned this already before, but there's a section that I titled like taxonomies of consciousness. And following that, I describe a system of game, metagame, dialectic, and metadialectic. And these are 4 terms that can define pretty quickly that are used for engaging with what were called view networks, which I didn't fully define in the first book, but that's a major theme of the second book is view networks and how you engage with them. Game is like whatever your present activity is. So like our game right now is we're doing a podcast, we're talking, you're interviewing me, I'm explaining stuff. So that's like the game level. And metagame is like your reason for playing the game. So if we go to example of like chess or something, one person might be playing the game to win, another person might be playing the game to have fun, a third person might be playing the game just to like learn from it. So metagame is like your motivation. Dialectic is the pattern. Well, I guess there are different ways to think about it. So dialectic is a combination of the questions you ask and then the kinds of things that you're trying to figure out with that. So dialectic is a term that I've borrowed and probably butchered a little bit from the way it gets used in academic philosophy, but it's like your way of talking. So what kind of questions are you asking? What information are you interested in? And dialectic is also includes the ways in which you change the lower categories. So like metagame, depending on what your motivation is, you might change the game you're playing. With your dialectic, depending on the kind of information that you're interested in, what your goals are like your metagame, but depending on the way you're asking questions, you might change your metagame. You might change your motivation for things. Your metadialectic is the pattern in which you change everything below that. So the pattern in which you switch between the kind of information you're concerned with, what your motivation is, and the game that you're playing. And you could theoretically extend that forever, like the pattern below this, how you change all of that. That is a description. It's a description of one way of thinking about what your consciousness is at any given point. A view network is like all of the nodes in a computation system, and each node is conscious. That gets contextualized in the second book as being like a city, for instance. The computation nodes of a city are the people in them. If you think about all the people moving around and doing whatever it is they do, moving matter, energy, they're performing operations, like mathematical operations. By changing your own consciousness within yourself, by changing like your dialectic and all of that, you alter the view network at large. But then on the other side within you, because there's always like the as above, so below thing going on, within you, you also have at least one view network, depending on how you want to conceptualize it. You have like different things inside of yourself that you could think of them as demons or angels or just like complexes, whatever. You have different items within yourself that each have their own drives and motivations, things that they do. So the second book is a framework for engaging with view networks, for engaging with those networks of consciousnesses.
Mm.
I know that's a lot of jargon.
No, I got it. I mean, I followed along. I used to be in academia, so I totally get it. But and I think you did a great job of breaking it down. I like it when academia gets butchered personally. So no, but I think you did a great job of breaking it down. I think I was just really taking that in and really appreciating just the level of work and complexity of it. you know, I just, I have to say, I really admire you and the work that you're doing. We don't know each other very well, of course, but I love seeing people going out there and innovating and doing stuff. There's frankly not enough occultists doing this kind of work, being out there on the edge. So as a fellow edge walker who's out there on the edge of occultism, I welcome you.
Well, thank you.
You know, it's good to meet somebody out who's doing something and going in a different direction, and pushing the evolution of magic. We sorely need it, and you know, it's just been a real pleasure today to interview you and learn more about what you're doing and the work. So for those of you who are watching this, you're going to see links to Allie's books, as well as to the link tree and other things in the show notes. And I highly urge you to check their work out, and to see what you think, and give it and give it a try from that thing where, like, if you get the book, don't just read it, like try to actually experience it as an embodied expression. Let it move you, because I think that's just my opinion. Do whatever you want with it, you know. Don't, I mean, like I always say, take anything I say with a lick of salt, right? Because, like, you know, who am I at the end of the day? I'm just somebody who's written a bunch of books. But even so, that doesn't mean a damn thing. That's just a fake authority there. But do whatever you want. But that's what I would recommend doing. And if you're interested in what I would recommend doing, then go ahead and give it a try for that reason. But thank you for coming on. I really think you're onto something great. Is there any last observation or anything that you want to share with us?
No, thank you. I really appreciate you having me on.
Excellent. All right. Well, so for people who are seeing this, this is again, the relaunch of the Magical Experiments podcast. I have some more guests lined up, so I'm really excited to be having them on. And you're going to find that this is a Patreon only type thing. So you may have seen like an excerpt, but if you want to watch the whole thing, of course, you're watching it now because you're on Patreon. All right. Thank you all, and take care.